Hello, rail fans, and welcome back to another episode of Fallen Flags America. I'm your host, L&M Productions, and today we'll be discussing the myth, the legend, the machine of the EMD GP30. The EMD GP30 was a 2,250 horsepower, 4-axle diesel-electric locomotive built by GM's Electromotive Division of LaGrange, Illinois, between July of 1961 and November of 1963. There were a total of 948 built for railroads in the US and Canada, with two only going to Canada, including four cabless B unit variants built for the Union Pacific. It was the so called second generation EMD locomotive and was produced in response to the increased competition by the new General Electric U-25B, which was released around the same time as the GP30. The GP30 is easily recognizable due to its high profile and steep roof, stepped roof, unique among American locomotives. The number are still in service. A number is still in service today in original or rebuilt forms, as we'll be discussing later in this video. The GP30 was conceived out of the necessity of matching new competitor General Electric's U-25B. The U-25B offered 2,500 horsepower, while EMD's GP20 and its 567D2 prime mover were only rated at 2,000. The U-25B also featured a sealed, airtight, long hood with a single inertiable air intake for electric cooling, with a pressurized cooling system which kept dust out of the engine and equipment area. Finally, the entire GU design was optimized for ease of access and maintenance. The U-25B demonstrators were receiving much more praise and orders from the railroads that tested them. Meanwhile, Alco had been producing the 2,400 horsepower RS-27 since 1959, although it had not been a good seller. EMD's engineering department pushed their DC traction system for the extra 205 horsepower. The 2,250 horsepower wasn't quite equivalent to the GE and Alco offerings, but EMD hoped the railroad's familiarity with EMD equipment would improve their chances. The locomotive, in which the 16-cylinder 567 D3 would be fitted, was improved along the lines of the U-25B. Oh, hang on a second. Whoops. The frame and the trucks of the GP20 carried across the extra equipment for the centralized air system required more space behind the cab, and since the locomotive was not going to be lengthened, extra space was achieved vertically by raising the height of the locomotive, giving room for the central air system, turbocharger, and electrical equipment all behind the cab. This extra height behind the cab meant that the body style used for previous Jeep units was not suitable. Since EMD wanted the new locomotive to be visibly modern and updated, they turned to the GM Automotive Styling Center at Troy, Michigan for help. The automotive stylist created the GP30's trademark hump and roof profile. The hump-like bulge started at the front of the cab and enveloped the air intakes for the central air system and the dynamic brake blister. Units ordered without dynamic brakes were the same shape but lacked the intakes to cool the dynamic brake resistor grids. A high short hood could be ordered, but only holdouts Norfolk and Western and the Southern Railway, both seen here, received such units. EMD originally planned to name the locomotive a GP22, but EMD's marketing department decided to leapfrog GE's numbering to make the new locomotive seem more advanced. The marketing literature claimed 30 distant improvements from a GP20 and that this was the reason for the number. Sales and in service. The GP30 successfully countered the GE threat and kept EMD in the dominant position in the North American diesel market. While losing a little power to the GE and Alco competition, the solidarity and reliability of the GP30 and the familiarity of railroad mechanical departments with EMD products ultimately won many more orders for EMD. 948 were sold in comparison to 476 U-25Bs. In addition, the GP30 was only sold until the end of 1963, while the U-25B was available until 1966. Most major railroads ordered GP30s, and smaller ones did too. The largest orders were from Southern with 120 units, UP with 111, the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe with 85, and the Baltimore and Ohio with 77. The sole buyer of B units by the mid 1960s, generally an outdated concept, was the Union Pacific, who kept the practice of running its locomotives in matched sets much longer than others. 13 of those GP30B units were fitted with steam generators for heating passenger trains, the only GP30s to ever receive heating generators or steam generators at this time. Prior to Amtrak, UP would use a GP30 and two boiler-equipped GP30s on passenger trains when no E8s or E9s were available. Some units for the Gulf Mobile in Ohio, Milwaukee Road, and Sioux Line were built using trucks from Alco trade-ins and therefore rode on ARR style Type B trucks instead of the EMD standard Blomberg B styles. An indisputable tribute to the quality of the GP30 design is the fact that a good number are still in service as of 2015, which is a service lifespan of over 50 years and well in excess of the design life, which is a maximum of 30 years and a minimum of 25 years for the average diesel locomotive. Furthermore, when life expired, some railroads chose to give them major rebuilds instead of scrapping them. Specifically, the Burlington Northern rebuilt GP30 and GP35 units to specifications of the GP39. These would be known as GP39Es, GP39Ms, and GP39Vs. Came not only from the ranks of the units with BN inherited from its own merger, but from the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, Seaboard Airline, Southern Railway, and others. Some of these units received new EMD Spartan cabs. The chassis system rebuilt its GP30s into GP30Ms, adding newer components, new traction motors, and reducing their horsepower to 2,000 instead of 2,250. They lasted with CSX into the mid to late 90s, long after the Seaboard System GP30s had been sold, retired, and scrapped, or rebuilt as road slugs. Original buyers. So the first of this list will be reading off the A units. There were two built as Electromotive Division demonstrators with road numbers 5629 and 5639. They would be sold to Union Pacific and renumbered to the first one would be sold to Union Pacific, renumbered to 875, while the second one was renumbered to Seaboard Airline 534 and then to Seaboard Coastline 1343. The Alaska Railroad would only purchase one GP30, numbered 2000. The Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe would purchase 85, numbered 1200 to 1284. Rebuilt versions were referred to as GP30Us, rebuilt at the Calvert, Texas shops. The Atlantic coastline would purchase 900 to 908. These would be renumbered to Seaboard Coastline 1300 to 1308. The Baltimore and Ohio, one of the largest buyers of the GP30, would have 77 units, numbered 6900 to 6976. The C&O, or Chesapeake and Ohio Railway, would have 48, 3000 to 3047. The Chicago, Burlington, and Quincy, also known as the Burlington, would have 38 units, numbered 940 to 977. These would become Burlington Northern 2217 to 2254. The Chicago and Eastern Illinois Railroad would have 3 units, 239 to 241. The Chicago Great Western would have 8, 201 to 208. They would become Chicago Northwestern 802 to 809. The Chicago, Milwaukee, St. Paul, and Pacific Railroad, better known as the Milwaukee Railroad, had 16 units, 340 to 355. And note this that they also rode on the ARR Type B trucks, rebuilt from Alco trade-ins. They would later be renumbered to 1000 to 1015. The Chicago Northwestern would have 14 units, 810 to 832. They would later get another 8 units inherited from the Chicago Great Western. The Canadian Pacific, the only Canadian buyer of this unit, would have 2 units, 8200 to 8201. These were built by General Motors Diesel or GMD in London, Ontario. They'd be renumbered to 5000 and 5001. The Denver and Rio Grande Western, or Rio Grande, had 28 units, 3001 to 3028. The Great Northern Railway would have 17, 3000 to 3016. These would be renumbered to Burlington Northern 2200 to 2216. The Gulf Mobile in Ohio had 31 units, 500 to 530. These would ride on older ARR Type B trucks rebuilt from Alco trade-ins. The Kansas City Southern Railway would have 20, 100 to 119. The Louisville and Nashville Railroad would have 58, 1000 to 1057. 2 of these units would last the CSX. The New York Central Railroad would have 10 units, 6115 to 6124. These would become Penn Central 2188 to 2197, and then Conrail with the same numbers. The New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, or Nickel Plate, would have 10 units, 900 to 909. These would become Norfolk and Western 2900 to 2909, having just a 2 added to their original number. The Norfolk and Western would have 44 units, 522 to 565. These would be built with the high hood, operated for long hood use. They would get another 10 GP30s from the Nickel Plate merger. The Pennsylvania Railroad had 52 units, 2200 to 2251. These would later be renumbered to 2250 through 2251 to Penn Central, then Conrail 2198 to 2199. Another batch would be renumbered to 2200 to 2249, to Penn Central, and then Conrail with the same numbers. The Phelps Dodge Corporation would have 9 units, numbered 24 through 32. These would operate in the new Cornelia branch mine. The Reading Railroad would have 20 units, 5501 to 5520. These would get renumbered to Conrail 3600 to 3619, and then to Conrail 2168 to 2187. Oh, the first batch of renumbering was actually Reading. I'm sorry. The Seaboard Airline would have 34 units, 500 to 533. These would be renumbered to Seaboard Coastline 1309 to 1342. They would get an additional unit from EMD being a former demonstrator unit. The Sioux line would have 22 units, 700 through 721. They would ride on AR Type B Alco trucks, and then 18 to the Wisconsin Central Limited with the same numbers. Southern Pacific would have 8 units, 7400 to 7407. The Southern Railway would have 120 units, 2525 to 2644. These would be built with high short hoods for dual control stand use. The St. Louis Southwestern Railway would have 10 units, 750 through 759. That railroad was better known as the Cotton Belt. The Toledo, Peoria, and Western, or TP&W, would have 1 unit, 700. The Union Pacific, the final buyer on the list of A units, would have 111 units, numbered 700 through 735 and 800 through 874. A total of 908 A units were produced. Next, I'll be reading off the list of B units built. The cabless B unit, or booster unit, is which the B stood for. There was one buyer for the GP30, being the Union Pacific. They had 40 of these built, numbered 700B to 739B. 13 units, 727B through 739B, were fitted with steam generators. Rebuilds. The Burlington Northern was the most extensive user of rebuilding GP30s. Finding a need for motorized units of lower power, it sent GP30s, both its own and units purchased from other roads, to be rebuilt. 70 units were sent to EMD, 65 to Morse Knudsen, now Washington Group International, and 25 to VMV for rebuilding, and the rebuilds were known as GP30Es if they were rebuilt by EMD, GP39Ms if they were rebuilt by Morse Knudsen, and GP39Vs if they were rebuilt by VMV respectively. The changes included new generators, -2 modular electric control systems, and 567D3 engines upgraded with 645 series prime movers. Power assemblies, rated at 2,300 horsepower each and designated 645 12D3s, which was the engine that they redesignated them as. These units are still in service today on local and smaller lines throughout the BNSF railway system. The next rebuilder on this list was the Ashton, Topeka, and Santa Fe, or ATSF, had previously performed a smaller upgrade in its own Clybourne shops at Clybourne, Texas shops, stripping the locomotives down to bare metal and rebuilding with new equipment. The 567D3 engines were upgraded to a 2,500 horsepower rating by the use of the 645 series prime power assemblies. The generators and traction motors were upgraded and control and electrical equipment was replaced. The trucks received Hyatt roller bearings and a single clutch brake system. The rooftop air conditioners and new horns were added. The locomotives were repainted into the blue and yellow bonnet scheme and designated GP30U or upgraded, which is what the U stood for. 78 of these survived until the BNSF merger and were eventually all sold off. In 2016, BNSF traded Larry's Truck and Electric, or LTEX, 12 GP38s for 24 of the ex-ATSF GP30Us for their GP39-3 rebuild program. The next rebuilder on here is the Reading Blue Mountain and Northern, acquired a total of 6 of the former BNSF ATSF GP30Us from LTEX and designates them as GP39RNs. The next rebuilder on this list is the Soo Line, which had three of their GP30s rebuilt with Cat 1335 engines rated at 2,000 horsepower. They are designated as GP30Cs. The last rebuilder on this list was Elna Central Gulf, which rebuilt two GP30s in the early 1980s. They were reclassified as GP26s. As of 2018, the units remain in service on the Cameron Valley Railroad. Preserved units. Many GP30s have been preserved by a variety of museums, societies, and tourist railways. None of the cabless B units were preserved. A number of these preserved units are in operational condition. The following is a list of preserved GP30s in North America. One has yet to be preserved, that being a former Baltimore and Ohio Railroad 6955, which as of this recording has since been preserved and has been bought by a railroad museum near the Cincinnati, Ohio area. The list of preserved GP30s includes New Hope and Ivyland 2198, Baltimore and Ohio 6944 at the B&O Railroad Museum of Baltimore, Maryland, Branson Scenic 99, formerly B&O 6973, is currently in operation on the Branson Scenic Railway as the South End Locomotive. Canadian Pacific 5000, one of the two GP30s built by GMD, is preserved and in its as retired condition at the Alberta Railway Museum in Edmonton, Alberta. Conrail 2233, a former PRR GP30, is at the Railroad Museum of Pennsylvania. It is believed to be serviceable but is currently in static display. Cotton Belt 5006 is preserved at the Arkansas Railroad Museum in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Condition is unknown. Denver, Rio Grande, and Western 3011 is preserved at the Colorado Railroad Museum in Golden, Colorado. So if I don't see anything on this list, if it says that it is in operational condition, we're going to say it's on static display. New Hope and Ivyland 2198, formerly Pennsylvania Railroad 2250, is currently running in daily service hauling tourist trains in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Nickel Plate Road 900 is preserved at the Mab River and Nickel Plate Railroad Museum in Bellevue, Ohio. Nickel Plate Road 901, its sister unit, is preserved and operating for the Cincinnati Railway Company, Lebanon Manson Monroe Railroad, and the Cincinnati Dinner Train. Its sister unit 902, another nickel plate GP30, is operating for the Cincinnati Railway Company, Lebanon Mason Monroe Railroad, and the Cincinnati Dinner Train. Norfolk and Western 522 is preserved in operating condition by the Roanoke chapter of the National Railway Historical Society and is currently stored at the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum, as seen here. Reading 5513, the first GP30 ever produced, is preserved by the Reading Company and Technical and Historical Society in Hamburg, Pennsylvania. Operational in the 1980s and 90s, it is currently undergoing repair. Reading Blue Mountain Northern 2535, one of the GP30Us mentioned of Santa Fe Heritage, is preserved in operating condition and currently in active service at the Lehigh Gorge Scenic Railway in Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Soo Line 700 is preserved at the Lake Superior Railway Museum in Duluth, Minnesota, restored for use on their North Shore Scenic Railroad. The Soo Line 703, one of its sister units, is preserved at the Colfax Railroad Museum in Colfax, Wisconsin. Southern Railway 2594 is preserved at the Southeastern Railway Museum in Duluth, Georgia, and is operational. Currently, it is on lease to the Tennessee Valley Railroad Museum. Southern 2601 is preserved and operational at the North Carolina Transportation Museum of Spencer, North Carolina, as seen here, when it was on a photo charter. Union Pacific 844, the engine that necessitated the renumbering of Union Pacific 844 to 8444 from 1962 to its retirement in 1989, is preserved and in use at the Nevada State Railroad Museum of Boulder City, Nevada, also known as the Nevada Southern Railway. Union Pacific 849, one of its sister units, is preserved at the Western Pacific Railroad Museum. Let me know down in the comments if I'm incorrect, but I believe of Portola, California, on where that museum is located. Walden's Ridge Railroad 1030, still in Seaboard System paint, is on loan from the Southern Appalachia Railway Museum to the Orlando Northwestern Railroad, operating excursions in the Orlando area, and waiting to be restored back to its original L&N appearance. As of 2021, confirmed by myself, this unit was spotted at the shops for oh, dang it. It'll come to me, but it was spotted at the shop complex for the Big Fork Scenic Railroad in Stearns, Kentucky. Western Maryland 501 and 502, both ex-Pennsylvania Railroad the 501 an ex-PRR GP30 2249 to be exact, and 502 an ex-Reading 5507 were preserved, both in active service on Western Maryland Scenic Railroad. Wisconsin Central 715, a former Sioux Line locomotive, is preserved at the National Railroad Museum of Green Bay, Wisconsin, on static display. NJRX 711, Railway Service Contractors of Kansas City, Missouri, was built as Sioux Line 711 and is used to load grain cars at a co-op elevator in Madrilla, Minnesota. That's going to do it for this episode of Fallen Flags America. I hope you enjoyed this in-depth look and discussion of the Locomotive Division GP30. In our next episode, we'll be discussing the GP35, a unit that was so popular it almost outsold its older brother, the GP30. That's going to do it for this episode, folks. If you enjoyed, please let me know down in the comments, and if you have a subject that you'd like me to discuss in the next video, feel free to post it down in the comments. I read all the comments on these videos. But until next time, I'll see y'all somewhere out there on the high iron. This is L&M Productions, out.